In my line of work as a senior move manager, we work with clients and help them with their treasures of a lifetime, along with all the other stuff that goes with it. People sometimes ask me, how much do you think all this is worth? When it comes to appraising people's treasures, our next guest is the expert they want to turn to. Moving your mom or your dad or yourself isn't just about moving things from one place to another. It is much more complicated than that, as are so many things having to do with later life. How to Move Your Mom and Still Be on Speaking Terms Afterward provides in-depth conversations with professionals, older adults, and their family members who share their stories with warmth, understanding, and humor. I'm your host, Marty Stevens-Heebner, and here you'll find answers to many of your questions, as well as different perspectives that I hope will inform and inspire you. Zillary Twill, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Let me tell you a little bit about Zillary. Zillary Twill founded Art Asset Management Group in 2009. As an accredited senior appraiser with the American Society of Appraisers, Zillary serves as a valuation expert as well as an art historian and art collector. She successfully managed the business affairs of art galleries, private collections, and exhibited at international art fairs. So Zillary, to start off, I wanted to ask you about your grandparents, but they had already passed by the time you were born. But you had a very big
family. My mother was one of 16 children, but not from the same parents. It was a blended family. And my father had 6 brothers and sisters. Right there, we have 22 relatives.
Wow.
Who had children. So I had a lot of cousins. I was really blessed.
And what's your favorite memory?
My best memories are spending time with my aunts and uncles. A group of my aunts and uncles had bought an old house in this tiny little town of maybe 50 people. And there was no running water. You had to go to the outhouse if you wanted to go to the bathroom. There was a pump in the kitchen. We all slept in the same room. We had all these old brass beds, single beds that we all would sleep in. And it was a cacophony of snoring and noises, and it was hysterical. It was really a lot of fun.
It was like a dormitory full of relatives.
Yeah, it was. And that was an amazing time.
Those sound like incredible memories. So let's now talk about yourself as an adult and the work that you do now. I described what you do, but I'd rather have you specifically talk about your work and the services you offer.
We are Art Asset Management Group, are a boutique business. That means that what we do is custom designed for the client that I'm working with. We're valuation experts. We value personal property. And personal property includes everything that's tangible, but not real estate. We don't value property or houses, but everything else we're capable of valuing. And we value for all intended uses. That could be estate planning. It could be for estate tax purposes. It could be for insurance coverage, insurance claims, for charitable donations. It could be for divorce. Anytime someone needs their assets valued that are personal property, not real estate, then we can be called in and do that valuation for them. That's the basic premise of the business. But then we get involved in doing other projects. I work with one client who owns a former bank building. 2 years ago, we removed a 40-foot mosaic off of that building and 3 sculptures, and we donated them to Chapman University, to the Hilbert Museum of California Art. And recently, we just took a 40-foot stained glass window off the same building, and we're in process of finding a home for that. So there's times when I'm dealing with historical projects. I may be valuing large-scale public art, which might be for a corporation's taxes. And then I'll do consulting. And someone may have artwork that they want to sell. So I'll find out what is the best way to sell it, whether it be putting it up to auction or finding a gallery to consign it to or someone to buy it. So I act on my client's behalf on all of these different levels.
I know it's very complicated, but you were just talking about determining where's the best place to try to sell something. How do you go about determining that?
I think it really depends on what the asset is. If you had the Picasso and you would like to sell it, depending on what it is it a drawing or is it a painting? You would then determine, is auction the best place, or is it best to consign it, or is it best to find someone to buy it privately? That is pretty easy. But then you get into the lower value works of art, which could be not a famous artist, that is by someone that doesn't have an auction record. Then I have to determine, is there a market for it? If there is, what is that? Could be a lesser known or lesser visible or lower priced auction house.
Let's be honest and realistic. If it's not a known artist, chances are it's better in an estate sale or something like that. Tell me
Right.
if I'm wrong.
No, you're absolutely right. It's very difficult. I'm working on a project right now. It's, I think, 95 works of art. They're in a corporation, but a lot of them have zero auction records. This is not going to the IRS. This is not going to court. There are certain situations where I will use a formula. This is the size, not a known artist, and boom, that's the price. But it's not easy. Even valuing expensive works of art is not always easy.
It just always goes up and down the scale. It's like any kind of a market, like the stock market, what have you. There are just times when certain artists are more valued than others.
I read all the art blogs. They are rediscovering paintings. Recently, they found Van Gogh's, what they consider to be his first self-portrait, because he still had his left ear. Because he was so poor, he painted on top of maybe another canvas or a piece of cardboard. And this museum was doing some restoration. They always x-ray to see what's underneath. This x-ray showed that there was a portrait underneath this. So now they're trying to figure out how are they going to separate the two successfully. There was, I think, a Matisse that was just discovered under another one of his paintings. Now, because of the progress that we have made with X-ray, the
Mhm.
testing of materials, there's a whole company that tests paint flecks, and they're able to date the paint. There's these new discoveries. They can now backdate a lot of artwork. They are finding that a lot of the Italian Renaissance paintings are not the school of, they were actually done by that artist.
Science is amazing.
Yeah, it is. People think creativity is art and then there's science. Without the science, you can't figure out the history of all of these works, especially ancient works.
I focused on ancient history when I was an undergrad, so I have a deep appreciation of ancient Greek sculpture and Egyptian. And I always say the Romans copied the Greeks, so I'm not as interested.
That's great.
Little mundane fact about Marty, but that is extraordinary. And science and creativity really do go together because so many scientific discoveries are as a result of someone thinking creatively and outside the box. Also, the thing that I've learned about art, what little bit I know, is there are people, they have that artist eye. It's just something they were born with and or developed. They can really see in proportions. And in a way, it's scientific, the way they go about looking at something and taking that and expressing it through paint or a drawing.
Well, look at Da Vinci. If you look at his notebooks, he was inventing airplanes back in the day, parachutes, all of these different things he invented, but he was a really incredible artist.
They go together. This is why I say we need to teach creative arts in schools because it's called creative problem solving for a
Right.
reason. We need to
Right.
develop that parts of my brain. Okay, stepping off my soapbox. Now let's talk about the selling of items, because obviously when you have the Picasso in the attic, that obviously goes to a Sotheby's or a Christie's or some other large auction house so that it gets top dollar. We were using the example of Picasso. Is it a drawing? Is it a print? Is it an original work? Can you describe why those are valued differently? So you have the original painting. There's only one that
One of a
exists.
kind. That's where the value is in the one of the kind, which is a painting, let's say an oil on canvas. Typically, that will be in any category across the board, the highest valued of the three. Then you could drop down to a work on paper, which could be an actual watercolor on paper. It could be pastel on paper. Now, watercolor and ink is called painting on paper. So that actually is a painting, but it's on paper, but they're lesser valued. Canvas has always been deemed the most valuable. The canvas is a lot more sturdy. A canvas will endure. It can last longer. Hence, it has value. It's not as fragile as a work on paper. Work on paper could age, it could burn, meaning if it's framed improperly, the edges get brown, it could get mold. And that's what those little spots are on works on paper. When you see little brown dots, that's mold.
Oh,
If it's around the edge, that is where the paper interacted with the gassing, the formula, the scientific aspect of the paper and the cardboard that they used to use to back that drawing and the wood in the frame. They all interact and release this gas that physically burns, singes the edge of the paper.
Talk about science right
Yeah,
there.
that is totally
Wow.
science.
You hear this stuff on Antiques Roadshow, but they don't really explain it the way that you just did.
If you see something that has a lot of brown spots on the surface, that's called foxing and it's mold. And you can get it on books. You can get it on canvas, but that's very rare. Paper can be torn, so it's much more fragile. And so paintings have always been considered the top valued item. Then you have your works on paper, whether it's painting on paper, it could be a drawing. And then the lowest level is a print. Now, that is not always true because it depends what that artist's most popular medium is. Andy Warhol made a gazillion prints and they're worth a lot, but his paintings will always get the top dollar. Contemporary artists, paintings bring a lot of money. The prints bring a lot of money, but not the 20 million that a painting will.
Yeah, art prices have just gone through the
Yeah.
roof. And the thing with prints, and I had to learn this, you'll see numbers by the signature, which will say 23/100. That means it's the 23rd print out of 100. Is that correct?
For the most part, Marty.
Oh, okay. Please
So-
explain.
Here's the deal. A contemporary artist that is primarily well known and published by one of the really top publishing houses. That is true. It is 1 through 100, let's say. But people don't realize that there is another set of prints that are assigned either letters or numbers. People like Dali had a Arabic numbered portfolio. It's like 1 through 100. They never did only 100. It was like 250, 300, 500. Then they had Roman numeral impressions. So it was 1 through 300 using Roman numerals. So all of a sudden you have 300 Roman, 300 Arabic. You could have 800 of that one image on the market. People go, I spent $25,000 for my Leroy Neiman. Why is it only worth 3,000? And people don't know that. And Dali was incorrigible. Who knows how many he made out of one image?
But I bet he made a lot of money that way.
I
So
think that he did.
there you go. Thinking about how long it takes to create an original painting, and people don't have an appreciation of this. It takes such a long time, months and months, and sometimes years to get that painting just the way that makes it remarkable.
And artists go back in and work on it maybe over a course of years. Wayne Thiebaud, California artist, very famous, who just died last year, would do that. Maybe he worked on something in 1977 and he might not have released it. So he would put 2 dates on it. He'd put 1977/2021 because that's when he actually finished it. So artists do that.
So that makes sense, especially when you're dealing with something that visual, that you need to take a step back from it because you get so in the weeds with those little brush strokes and you almost can't see the painting anymore. That's fascinating. What do you love about what you do?
I like to come in and make a plan and figure out what our course of action is going to be. So that's what I love about the business. And I guess I like to feel needed. I've worked with you, Marty, and you go into these homes and the people don't know what they have. It's chaos because no one has put in place a plan. It's a bad time to make a decision about the art that you have in your house. Your spouse just died, your parents, someone just died, and now you got to deal with all this stuff. And so I'm an organized person, as you are, and I like making lists and helping people figure out, what do we do with this? Do we bring in someone like you to inventory everything like we did in that one case? Then I value it. And then we decide, do we sell everything? Do we donate it? I like people to get things in order. And I think that's the biggest thrill. I'm an art historian. I barely made it out of college with that degree. What can I tell you? I wasn't a great student.
But you are sure an expert now.
It's crazy. It's like, how did this happen? But I just diligently worked on it and I found that this is my niche, helping people, applying my studies. And in some cases, I go to homes and look at the most incredible artwork that you would only see in a museum. So it's like having a private tour through a museum. That's another great part of my business.
I always say with the business that I am, where we go in and we work with people's treasures and determine if are they moving, are they going to age in place, is it a clear out, as we call it. You can get a sense of the life that was lived there and learn the history of the family through the objects. What do you wish people knew about what you do?
That's a good question. I just wish people understood when people decide to get an appraiser, they don't realize the costs that are involved. A lot of people think it's like the Kelly Blue Book. You flip to the Blue Book and we have the green top, whatever size it is, and it's that price. But it's not that at all.
It ain't a car.
It
It's
is
not a car.
not a car. You have the year it was done. Is it in good condition? You have all these variables. It takes time and there's databases for certain things. But then if you're doing something for insurance coverage, a lot of times you have to call the gallery. That is a job at a gallery exclusively to answer appraiser questions. It's very complicated. And then you have criteria and standards that you have to follow when you're writing an appraisal report because it's a legal document. I work like an attorney. I work by the hour. It just depends what it is that I'm working on, how long it's going to take. And I can't pull a number out of the atmosphere, particularly when I'm talking to the client and they have no record of what they own. I will tell you, Marty, there are so many people who did not keep any records. They didn't keep any invoices. They've never had it insured. Then I have to go and figure out, especially if it's not a known artist, who is this artist?
And this comes down to provenance. That's what you're talking about. Can you
Exactly.
describe what that is and why it's needed?
I always ask people, do you have records of where it came from? So they inherit it from their parents. Do you know where they got it? Did they get it at a gallery in Palm Beach on Worth Avenue, or did they get it from their parents? The provenance is the history of a work of art. It's the path that the art took to end up at its final destination, which is the owner that I'm appraising the art for.
And specifically that it is documented. It can't
Right.
just be hearsay or somebody saying, oh, my dad told me that. You have to have the documentation if it's valuable.
There is oral history involved,
Oh,
but nothing is better than a clear history. Came from so-and-so. It ended up in an auction house. Then my parents bought it and then it's been passed down. There is a company, it's called Proper Provenance, and it's a young woman I adore who has developed a business to research provenance. Because especially if you're dealing with works that might have issues because they were sold pre and during World War II.
I was just going to bring that
Yeah.
up. The whole issue with the Holocaust and the Nazis stealing the art.
Yeah. And a lot of people sold their art for pennies just so they could get a passport to get to some other country, whether it's Havana or China. The stories are very sad. The good thing is that there are laws in place now, and they don't have a time limit on them. They changed those laws because now with so much information being shared on the internet, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of repatriation of artwork. It's not 100%. Some countries do not abide by the laws. A lot of artwork is being repatriated, but not everything. And the interesting thing is, Marty, is that the wealthy families who photographed their houses and they photographed the rooms, their living rooms, their dining rooms, and
Oh.
they photographed it with all the art in it. And these were in catalogs and in books that the family had made. They're black and white photographs. And that has really helped a lot of the scholars go back and say, this house was photographed in 1935. And there's that Van Gogh, there's that Klimt on the wall. And that showed that family owned those works of art. The photography has been a huge asset in making these discoveries.
That's
It's-
remarkable. I did not know about that. That's fascinating. What's the toughest part of your job?
I think the toughest part of my job is researching the values. For the most part, since I've been in business for 42 years, I've been around a lot of art. Grew up with art, used to be a director of 2 galleries. I've worked with a lot of the major artists in the world, but it's valuing it because you can't just pull it out of the atmosphere. You actually have to do the research. You have to then present the value in a way that is understandable, that's clear, concise, makes sense. And you have to provide comparables to arrive at your value conclusion. And that's not always so easy. It takes time because you're actually researching. And then the time that it takes to do a report, it's a legal document. And because it's a legal document, you have to be very careful in what it is that you put on paper. Let's say you're doing a divorce. So you come up with a value, but then the opposing person can also go have an appraisal done. So you have two different values. Then if they can't settle, the judge has the right to appoint a third appraiser.
Oh,
In the Harry Macklowe case, who was a big real estate developer in New York, same thing happened. He had a high appraisal, his wife had a low, or vice versa. They weren't even close. And the judge said, we're not going to do the third one. You have to sell everything, which they did, and you can split it. That was like $680 million or something. It was a lot of money. And so divorce is a difficult situation. And then you have your charitable donation. That is really a legal document. That goes to the IRS. So if you're wrong, that report can be audited, and you, as well as your client, can be responsible financially for the difference in value. I just wish that someone could do like a big billboard internationally that these are legal documents and it takes time to craft them. Depending on what rabbit hole I go down in trying to get the information, I've had pieces that I've told the client, these are not by the artist that your family said they were by.
that can't be fun.
I got to break the news that this is not by who they thought it was. And you will never be able to present it as that because it's just not true. We're not authenticators, but when it's so blatant, it's not by that artist.
And how can you tell that?
In many cases, I reach out to my colleagues that own galleries, not appraisers, but galleries that work with that artist, whether living or dead. I show them the artwork, and I have in the contract with my client that I have authority to present works to experts. I will have to do that sometimes just because I don't feel that it's right. The signature is wonky. I'll dig deep trying to find all the signatures of one artist and something signed in blue ballpoint pen. Well, no, they didn't have that in 1920, I don't think,
Certainly not in 1870 or something like
Yeah,
that.
so things like that happen. It's really a lot of work. And I think too, Marty, people don't understand what being credentialed really means as an appraiser.
I want to talk about that. I have issues within my profession
Right.
because you want to work with somebody who's certified in what we do and has accreditation in the industry. That's so important, given that you could be valuing something that's worth several $1,000,000. You're a senior appraiser, accredited senior appraiser with the American Society of Appraisers. Now, what kind of hoops do you have to jump through for that?
You have to go back to school and you have to take courses that are appraisal study courses. So that's the start. Then you decide that you're going to become accredited because in our association, the top level is accredited. Then you have to actually take an exam. It's like a 3-hour art history exam.
It's like a bar exam for appraisers.
Yeah, exactly. If you pass, and lots of people do not pass, you become accredited like I did.
This brings me to another very important question. What questions should people be asking an appraiser when they're considering hiring them?
Are you accredited with American Society of Appraisers? Are you certified with the Appraisers Association of America or the International Society of Appraisers? Those are the three associations. Are you current with what's called USPAP, Uniform Standards of Appraisal Practice? That is something that is required by the IRS for you to have, as well as being current with your credentials. Are you knowledgeable in this area that you're going to be appraising? So if I have a great Impressionist art collection, I would say, how many Impressionist paintings have you appraised before? Is this your area of expertise? If they're honest, they would say, no, I've only appraised furniture. That's not the person you want to be hiring. People really need to investigate because you're going to get a legal document. And if that person doesn't know what they're doing, it's problematic for a lot of different reasons.
Chances are if somebody turns it around overnight, that's a problem because they really haven't done the homework.
Right.
Because it sounds like appraising is a lot of homework.
It is. That's why I don't read.
For pleasure. Read
Yeah,
for
she said,
pleasure,
I want
right?
you to join a book club. I said, all I do is write thesi every day. All I do is I research, I write, I research, I write. That's what you do. You actually have to write term papers every day.
I would think understanding the history of art is vital to being an art appraiser.
It is. I ran 2 galleries. That means I know how to buy, I know how to sell. I still to this day work at art fairs. I work in Art Miami every year. I was just in Chicago for the big art fair, working that in Chicago.
And I just want to point out that they are not the ones on the corner or in the nearby
No.
park. These are the major art gatherings, conventions, conferences, whatever you want to call it.
Good point.
So let's talk about the older generation and the artwork they possess. What if they're aging in place or they're moving to assisted living or one partner is moving to assisted living or someone has passed? How does all that work?
It can become complicated, Marty. Most people have never inventoried their possessions. I would put that first on the list for anyone is inventory everything, whether it's artwork, household contents like furniture, appliances.
Grab a camera, grab some video. If you've got kids, make it a project for the whole family. Have them document things in their room.
Good idea. And you can put it into an Excel spreadsheet or even just type it up on a list.
And keep it out in the cloud. Because here in California, we get fires, we get earthquakes, there are thefts. Other places get flooding. You just never know what can happen.
I agree. If you don't do anything else, do that. Make a list and figure out what it is that you have. One of the things too is anytime you buy something, particularly art, save the receipt and do a file of that artist. So let's say it's a Salvador Dali. Make it a separate file with the invoice that you got. If there is an insurance schedule, put that into this art file. So when the time comes, you have a list that you made, you have files made for each artwork. That's a good starting point. But then you need to call somebody in to figure out what is this worth. You have to figure out what it is that you have before you start giving it away, because that's what happens when you read those stories that someone bought a Whistler etching in a thrift store for $15 and they sold it for $3 million. People get in a rush, get rid of this, and things are overlooked. So it does take some time, but it's better when the collector is still alive, where you can ask questions. Sometimes people can't because it's too late. Someone has died, someone has Alzheimer's, they are going to a care unit. When my mother was diagnosed with an aneurysm, she lived with severe migraines her entire life. My father had passed. I have a sister. We went through the entire house and made a list with a line down the middle, who got what watch. I got the other watch, who got the diamond this and diamond that. And we had a list, and my sister and I Xeroxed it. We put the original in her safety deposit box. And when my mother passed, we had the list. It was really easy to determine what to do with everything.
As you were saying earlier, someone you love passes. You're struck down by grief, and yet everybody's asking you questions. You have to make major decisions all in the course of a few weeks, or you're expected to. It's incredibly difficult. The simpler you can make it for those who will survive you, the kinder you are being.
I've been named art executor in some of my clients' wills. So when one spouse or both are gone, they call me in to figure out what to do with the art. I'm working on one of those right now. When the first spouse died, we ultimately auctioned so the surviving spouse could stay in her house, make sure that she had the money to have care. And she just passed away about a month ago. And now we're working on the remaining art, what to do with it. I work with the attorney, the CPA, and the family in a case like that.
That's fascinating. So I guess in the will, they would have to distinguish you as the art executor and then the person who's the executor of everything else.
Right.
I had not heard of that before.
Yeah, it's helpful, especially because I'm familiar with the artwork. I might have sold them the artwork. I might have appraised it over the course of the years. So it makes things a lot easier. Of course, you always get people that think they can do it on their own. But for the most part, if people want to maximize the estate holdings, it's best to call in someone who has experience in art, not figure it out on your own.
That's beautifully put, Hillary. I have learned so much during this discussion. So thank you very much for joining me.
It's been a pleasure, as always, Marty. Thank you for inviting me today.
Thank you so much for listening to How to Move Your Mom and Still Be on Speaking Terms Afterward. Please visit howtomoveyourmom.com for more information about this episode and for additional podcast episodes featuring other extraordinary guests and conversations. Until next time, this is your very grateful host, Marty Stevens Huebner.